Welcome back to another series of the iStill Online University. Today I want to start with a sort of recap. We've discussed a lot of things, how distillation works, the Holy Trinity and flavors. And the last video you've probably seen was about me doing cuts on the brandy that Willem made. And we spoke a bit about what flavors to expect where. What I want to do right now is go back to the Holy Trinity of distillation, which is to my right. Go back a little bit, summarize a little bit, and then translate it to flavor. And why do I want to talk to you about flavor profiles? Because if you've listened to this video, the next thing I want you to do is actually start buying a few bottles of vodka, whiskey, and fruit brandy. The fun can start. I want you to start training your palate. Don't do this alone. And do it in a stay-at-home situation. Don't drive afterwards. Do it together, because together you can sort of write down what flavors you see where in your mouth and see if you can come to a sort of understanding together and train each other. It works much better if you do this in couples or in pairs. So first a recap of the Holy Trinity of distillation. And the Holy Trinity of distillation basically consisted of three steps explaining how distillations and flavors and the way flavors transit through your mouth actually work. First step is that if we do a distillation run, first thing that comes over in red here is the heads. The second thing, the second cut in green here are the hearts, and then the last part of the run we get tails over. And on the second level of the Holy Trinity model, what we see is that those cuts for heads, hearts and tails associate perfectly with fruity flavors at the beginning, with the flavors of the substrate where a product is made from, so basically the grain flavors from a whiskey in the middle, for instance the molasses flavors from a rum you can find in the middle in your hearts cut. Those tails that come at the end of the run associate with roots, with nutty flavors, rooty, earthy, wet flavors. That's the second level of the Holy Trinity of distillation. And the third level is how does the spirit transition through your mouth? You take a sip, close your mouth, make sure that the spirit hits all the parts of your mouth, all the inside of your mouth. You then swallow, you keep your mouth shut and you start counting. Where does it hit me? First second, beginning of your mouth, your gum, front of your tongue. First second. Second 2 till 5, 6, middle of your tongue. And then after 6, 7 seconds, if there's any taste remaining, you will taste it, have that sensation at the back end of your palate, at the back end of your tongue, towards your throat. And again, this associates perfectly. So the front of mouth first second of tasting is where you taste sweetness, fruitiness, is where you taste heads associated flavors, head smearing into your final hearts cut. Seconds 2 to 6, 7 is where we actually taste middle of mouth. It's on top of your tongue that you do your tasting. That's where you can actually taste what's going on, and that's where you're supposed to actually taste the substrate that your spirit is made from. After 6, 7 seconds, the flavors transition to the back end of your palate, to your throat, back of mouth, and basically what you start to taste there is those earthy, rooty flavors that actually associate and come over with a tails faction. These are the high boiling point alcohols. Now that's a recap. If you want to know more, scroll up a little bit and find the whole 20 minutes on the Holy Trinity. For now, I just want to recap and translate it to you guys starting to train your palate yourself. How do we go from this model to an objective taste model? Quite easy. We make 3 categories horizontally: front of mouth, middle of mouth, and back of mouth. You now know that these associate with head smearing, pure hearts and the substrate, and tail smearing, where we have those rooty and earthy flavors. So this basically is a timeline. First second, second 2 to 6, and everything after 7 seconds. So you start counting and see where those flavors hit you. And what I added to the grid is an intensity level. 3 is like full flavored, a lot of flavor. Wow. 1 is like a little bit of flavor. Yeah, there's some flavor there, but you sort of have to search for it. And 2 is like flavor. There's flavor. It's not exceptionally intense. It's not exceptionally light either. That's a 2. So now all of a sudden, based on the Holy Trinity and based on intensity of flavors, we can have a grid that consists of 9 squares. You can start to square out what you're tasting. And then make sure that what you taste actually corroborates with how a product should taste. So what I've done here is basically I've drawn 3 grids, 1, 2, and 3, of 3 normal product or spirit categories. And of course they can change a little bit, but this is like normally how a certain spirit should taste. Take it as an example. And then there is 3 empty ones. And maybe these empty ones stand for the bottle that you bought in the store and that you're testing together with a partner, together with a friend, together with a buddy, together with your husband or wife in order to train your palate. And if it's the same spirit category, it should have the same kind of definition. It should have the axis on the same places. And if it doesn't, what does that tell you about the product? And how could you change that during distillation or fermentation? So let's start with the first one. The first one highlights a product that apparently doesn't have flavor in the beginning. Nothing hits you in that first second of tasting, first second after swallowing the spirit. And nothing happens at the back of your mouth. There is basically nothing happening at the beginning and at the end. The only thing you might notice is a little bit of flavor, a little bit, because we're at level 1 here, in the middle, from second 2 to second 6. What product would this signify? I think it's quite easy. No beginning, no end, a low flavor profile in the only category that can be available, the middle of mouth region. This has to be a vodka. And it is. This is the perfect way to describe a perfect vodka. So if you make vodka, and you already started training on the iStill Mini, right? If you start making vodka, and you get this flavor profile, it's pretty much a perfect vodka. There's a hint of the substrate it's made from. You might be able to say, like, this is a rye, yeah, this is a rye vodka, or maybe this is a wheat vodka. You're not going to talk about fruitiness, you're not going to distinguish. If it's well made, earthy and rooty flavors. Your taste sensation, if there's going to be a sensation, is going to be very limited between seconds 2 and 6. Anything after that is bad, because there shouldn't be a cross here, because, hey, there isn't. Anything in the first second shouldn't be there either. It tells you something about vodka, and we'll elaborate on that, not in this series of videos, but a bit later, if you scroll down a little bit. Like, how do you cut for vodka? You cut out heads, you cut out tails, you cut out associated flavors. So in vodka making, cut out heads, cut out hearts, you're left with the green bar in the middle, the substrate, and you only taste it middle of mouth. Now let's see what happens if you buy a vodka, and I would say start with a cheap one. What I very often find in vodkas is that the actual flavor profile is here, but there's also quite some fruitiness or sweetness in there. And people sometimes even highlight that. There's one, I forgot the name, I think it's a Polish vodka producer that say, actually our vodka has a fruity dimension to it and we're very, very proud of that. No, you're not. You shouldn't have taste at the beginning, because those fruity and sweet flavors at the beginning at so many vodkas that aren't very good have basically mean that they screwed up the heads cut. They have too much head smearing in there. Very greedy procedure. You get more product, but you also create something that is not akin to vodka. You need to get rid of this. So very often vodkas tend to go a bit in this direction. And it's not a question of preference, it's simply wrong. And with this understanding and training yourself, buy a few bottles from stores, and don't be Don't be alarmed if basically you even get some sweet and fruity flavors out of high-end vodkas, because many have this infection, many have this problem. And then try to do it, basically put the vodka in your mini, rerun it, do a heads cut, dilute it to 40%, and see if you got rid of that dimension. I can assure you that if you did your run correctly on the mini, you can get rid of those flavors and go back to how a vodka should taste. Yeah, but I like fruit vodkas. Basically, yeah, fruit infuse your vodka. If we talk vodka, the real thing, it's about purity, limited flavor, only of the substrate, no fruity flavors, no earthy and rooty flavors. Very often it is what you see. And I want you to get a few bottles and start training and testing yourself according to the methodology I just explained. And that I explained, I think in the previous video, when I did the cuts on the brandy that Willem made. Right, so that's vodka. And this is how you can make amazing vodka. And not only can you make amazing vodka, you now have a model to talk to your customers about. Would you like to try our vodka? We've got a signature vodka here. And I go, oh wow, that's an amazing vodka. I said, oh, this is how we make it, and this is why we make it the way we make it. We think that a vodka doesn't need to have a front and a back. Otherwise you might as well have a fruit brandy, or maybe even the whiskey. And in order to do so, we do this and that, such and so. And once they have understood, and this goes very quickly, why your vodka is spot on, all of a sudden when they go and buy other bottles of vodka that aren't spot on, they're going to say like, yeah, actually, this is not the best vodka I had. And they'll return back to you, show up in your shop, buying another bottle of your vodka. And I think that's the goal, right? You need to make money on this, guys. So let's go to the second category. So I didn't write down front of mouth, middle of mouth, back of mouth, first second, seconds 2 to 6, anything beyond 6 or 7 seconds. But you get the idea, right? Taste intensity 1, light flavors, medium flavors, and number 3, very heavy flavors. So we here have a product category. And that's my second example that you want to test. And you don't have to do this all in 1 week or weekend. You can sort of say like, yeah, let's take a bit of rest and let's migrate to the next one. But maybe start with vodka, because it's quite easy. Only 1 X. And in general, it's quite easy also to identify where the mistakes are. What do we see here? We see a medium flavor profile at the beginning and a heavy flavor profile at the middle. This product apparently doesn't have a backhand. So it hits you in the front in the first second. It really hits you in the middle, seconds 2 through 6. And afterwards, nothing happens. So if you count, how long do I taste? After 6, 7, 8 seconds, nothing happens. Now this could be a gin, or this could be a fruit brandy. So you can have a few gins, or you can buy a few fruit brandies and see if you get those flavor profiles. Not all fruit brandies are created equal. Some are somewhat lighter, and then the X goes down a little bit. Some are very fruit forward, fantastic for a fruit brandy, amazing for a gin that goes together with tonic. But especially with a fruit brandy, if you increase the level of head smearing, of course you also increase the level of headache that you're going to wake up with tomorrow. So be careful on what you taste. But let's say this is a quite okay graph for 2-dimensional gin or for a fruit brandy. What are the mistakes that we very often see with fruit brandy? One of the mistakes that we very often see with fruit brandy is that even if they follow the classical pattern, is that there is a lot of backhand happening. And do you remember how the head-see, the fruity flavors, are responsible for 30% of the total flavor? And how the substrate is only doing 20% of the flavors? But basically, that it's the tails-associated flavors that have most of the esters in them, are much heavier, and especially in a fruit brandy or in a lighter category gin, it's those earthy and rooty flavors that very simply, very easily can overpower the fruity front that you're looking for in those two products. Very often you see that fruit brandies have that very extra dimension. And you can test it by taking a sip, covering the inside of your mouth, swallowing and starting to count. If anything happened after 6-7 seconds, I guarantee you it's happening at the back end of your tongue, in your throat. It's tails-associated flavors, and because these flavors are so heavy and intense, they tend to overpower the fruitiness we're looking for in especially a fruit brandy. Buy a few. See if you can make it work. Fruit brandy. I didn't say cognac. For cognac this might actually be a good style because the bigger flavors at the back sort of help the brandy in a cognac stand up against the wood aging, the barrel flavors. But in a white fruit brandy, so let's focus on a white fruit brandy here, a clear fruit brandy, not an aged product, you shouldn't have that third dimension. It screws your drink up. Very often you can identify that after swallowing a sip, you actually have a little burn at the back end of your throat. All signals are on red, they cut too late. And because they cut too late, what basically happens is that a lot of those flavors are overpowering the delicate fruity flavors at the beginning of your tasting experience. So buy 2 or 3 fruit brandies. Make sure they're real fruit brandies, not some vodka with some additives to it. And test yourself and train and see if you can identify those mistakes. And also understand that now that you have the fruit brandy, maybe put it in the iStill Mini, dilute it to 25% with some water, do a run, and cut out the tails. So stop a bit earlier, maybe at 95 or 96 degrees. Cut out some tails, and all of a sudden, if you dilute it again to 40% or to the same strength as the original fruit brandy was, you'll see that a lot, if not everything, of these back-end flavors have gone, and you have an improved fruit brandy that much clearer shows and highlights those fruity flavors you were after. So this part of the course is not just about explaining to you how the flavor model works in reality and practice and how you can train yourself with it. I challenge you to basically take that vodka, take that fruit brandy that you store-bought and that you now tested, put it back in the Mini, dilute it to 25% and do a run. If there's a mistake here, cut out some heads. If there's a mistake there in your fruit brandy, the stuff you bought, take a head and extra tails cut. Dilute it, give it a few days to rest and marry, and all of a sudden you'll see that you now already can make a better product, than what you bought in the store just a few days ago. Vodka, fruit brandy. Third and last one for today. What do we have here? Hey, a 3-dimensional product that highlights the back-end flavors. Beginning, middle, and end. Front of mouth, middle of mouth, back of mouth. This should be, by looking at the axis, a taste experience that probably takes 15 to 25, maybe even 30 seconds. There's a lot happening after seconds 6 and 7. And a lot of flavor intensity too. There's a lot of flavor intensity in the middle, and there's a medium flavor at the beginning. First second, seconds 2 to 6, and then everything after seconds 7 or 8 is tails associated. If we go back a little bit to the holy trinity of distillation, that basically means that in their cutting, they went into that direction to incorporate quite a few tails, quite a lot of tails, in order to have those earthy and rooty flavors that you cannot just taste as earthy and rooty, but that you also can identify because they hit you back of mouth. Transition towards your throat. This is the classical design scheme, the classical grid for a whiskey. Not talking whiskey with an E in there, but whiskey with a Y, like the stuff they make in Scotland, and the stuff for a large time that they actually used to make in America. Medium beginning, a lot of flavor in the middle, a lot at the back. Buy a few whiskies, go for a single malt, non-peated one, because that will sort of overpower your palate, so maybe a Highland one that isn't peated from Scotland. Maybe have a bourbon, regular bourbon, maybe have a Woodford Reserve bourbon, and maybe some other whiskies. Just try around. The fun about whiskey is that because there is three-dimensionality and a lot of flavor, it starts to become more and more interesting and more challenging to sort of find the mistakes, but not really challenging if you started with vodka and learned about wrong head cuts, dived into fruit brandies and probably identified mistakes made on the tails cut. So now you have both dimensions to play with. When I look at whiskies, I see often two mistakes appearing. And they're mistakes, so they can be adjusted. And you can use your iStill for it, maybe. Or you can use fermentation protocols for it, maybe. We're going to dive into fermentation a little bit later, if you scroll down. First, whiskey. So, the two mistakes I see, if I go to very old and aged products, is that basically the X, front of mouth, the first second, is very low or it is not there at all. And that has to do, and there is a video out there that we already placed online, that has to do with the fact that aging-wise, the head C factors age out faster than the tail C factors. And they're also more volatile. So after 3, 4, 5 years, head C fruity flavors are aged out. And then they just continue to oxidize and oxidize and oxidize, and basically there's nothing left after 12 to 15 years. So if you have a 15-year-old Scottish whiskey, don't be surprised if this X is there. Actually, don't be surprised if it isn't there at all. Nothing happens in some whiskeys in the first second. In reality, you've just turned, by aging, over-aging that whiskey as a distillery into a two-dimensional product. Wow, I think that's bad. I understand that there's a benefit to longer aging, but if it's good, it's good. If you age it longer, it doesn't become better. As your car gets older, it doesn't necessarily get better. But then again, that's how things are sold. This is 15-year-old instead of 12, so it must be better, right? Well, I'm not sure. There's also, and we're deviating a little bit, but there's a series on barrels and on aging that we already released in the iStill Online University, and that has everything to do with how do you finish, right? So why in Scottish whiskey is that last finish on a barrel, a wine barrel, on what else do they use, a sherry or a port barrel, so important? Well, after 12 years, all of your fruity flavors have gone away. What if you put that old stuff for 2 years in a barrel with a lot of fruity flavors from wine, port or sherry? We crank it back up. But I think it's masking a mistake. You over-aged, over-oxidized, and that's the first mistake you see, that many whiskies, aged whiskies especially, longer aged whiskey, have lost their first dimensionality. And yeah, you can bring it back by adding port and sherry and wine, because that's what you're basically doing if you choose to finish your whiskey for a year, 2 years on those kind of barrels. Feels like cheating, because the flavors were there. You just screwed up by aging too long. The second mistake I see, and in some parts of the world it's not even considered a mistake anymore, is that the third dimension is missing. So let's say this is okay, this is there, and then all of a sudden there's no third dimension. Is it aging that sort of made this drop? No, because tailsy molecules and associated flavors recombine, and by recombination they become more interesting, and this process stops after, well, depending on how much tail smearing you allow, this process stops after a few years. But it doesn't diminish, it doesn't oxidize, it doesn't get less, so it just stays at the same level. So how come so many whiskies only are two-dimensional? Because they do have a beginning and a middle. They forgot about the back end. You remember still design? You remember bubble caps that are perfect tail straps that hamper tails from coming over, because bubble cap stills, bubble cap columns, are designed for a fruit brandy to prevent tail smearing. This is now the still of choice for many, many distillers. Also big distillers that use continuous columns use bubble caps. And bubble caps are very good at making sure that no tails come over. So all of a sudden you create a two-dimensional, sweet, front of mouth, middle of mouth kind of whiskey that we nowadays tend to call bourbon. Buy some whiskeys, buy some bourbons. Did I say buy Woodford Reserve already? I think I did. The reason I want you to buy that one, especially because that one is made on a pot still. Pot still creates three-dimensionality. Guys, that's it, at least for now. I wish you a lot of fun while training, and I hope you pick up on the model really soon. It usually takes 1, 2, maybe 3 sessions for you to almost blindly hit a product afterwards. We do this here all the time. I mean, training, we don't call it drinking, we're training a lot. And whenever William or Sebastian or I compare our flavor notes, they're all the same. It's an easy model, it's easy to go to, you need a little bit of training, and there's some fun to be found there as well. That's it, let's move on to the next topic.